Hi readers, welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads. Lee here, and it is time for my May reading recap, and I read a ton of books in May. I don't even know how I did it. I even had to check myself to make sure that I didn't have some books left over from April. And I have actually achieved one of my goals in May. I managed to review 4 or 5 books. I think it's 4 videos, but 5 books. And I say review, it's really my thoughts on the books. It's not an actual official review. But I will share the links down in the description for my reviews if you'd like to take a look at those. I started off the month with a book that was a little out of my comfort zone. It was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, Wolf at the Table. I don't know if the book was a finalist or just the author, by Adam Rapp. And this is one of the books I did do a thoughts on books on. So I'm going to just let you look at that to get my deep thoughts. When I get far away from a book, I tend to forget everything about it except the feeling. And I remember being questionable about this when I finished it, but now I have a good feeling about it. When I go back and look at some of my notes, I'm like, yes, this was a really good book. It reminded me in some ways of The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters, which I don't have on my shelf back there. But it was really a story about a family. It goes through generations, and really just, I do recommend that one. Next up, I needed something light, and I got it in The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. I did not do a thoughts on books on this. This was just a fun, quick read. I enjoyed myself looking at all the husbands that came down out of the attic. If you need something light, The Husbands is it. Next up, one of the most frustrating things is when you look forward to a book and you are so excited for it, and then the book just lets you down for some reason. And that's the case with my next book, which I also did a video on, and that is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. Look at this slipcover, and then look at this cover. Fantastic. But sadly, that was the best thing about that book. And whenever I'm disappointed like that, I get almost angry. Really, I'm really angry at myself because I looked forward to something that was just a complete letdown for me. If this, to me, read like a YA, a badly written YA, and I will never read Geneva Rose again. Again, you can check out my thoughts in the link in the description box. Next up, I read The Silence by Tim LeBon, and there's actually a Netflix movie on this. And, sorry, I got distracted about dog murder. But overall, I found this really enjoying it. It was about, kind of similar to A Quiet Place, although I think this predated that. Or at least they weren't. This is not a ripoff of The Quiet Place, but it is about, in this case, it's some kind of creature that's been buried alive, buried underground for millennial. They get broken out, and then they start feeding on Earth, and they don't have eyes, so they go on hearing. Really, really good. I do recommend this. After that, because there was a dead dog in that, maybe 2, I needed again something light, which I'm not sure if this was light because there was a death in there. Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. In this one, 2 former best friends who realize they're in love with each other are forced to take their former English teacher on a final, I guess, road trip to where he wants to die. So that part is bittersweet, but throughout, it was really fun. I did find it lagged in one particular place, but again, good romance. This would have been good to read for Pride Month. If you haven't read it, I do recommend this one. Sorry, I've got no room on my table because there's books, so I gotta drop them down there. Next up, a book I've had in my TBR for a long time. It also had a videotape on the cover, but this one did not let me down like Geneva Rose did. This one, Dead 11, the main character is going to look for his sister who has disappeared on this island where it's not like an island that you can ferry over to. You have to get somebody to take you over to. The island is stuck in the 90s. Really fascinating concept. I think I gave this 3 stars. I believe it's a debut, but I really enjoyed myself with this one, trying to figure out what the secret of the island was and how it would resolve itself. So I think in total, I've read 21 books this month, 20 or 21. I can't even believe it. So this video may be a little bit longer. Next up, a nonfiction book. And as soon as I finished Dead 11, usually I read nonfiction separately, but as soon as I finished Dead 11, I had started this one the night before. I immediately picked up this nonfiction book to finish it because I could not wait. I needed to read it all the way through. And that is Send Me, The True Story of a Mother at War by Marty Scoveland Jr. and Joe Kent. I believe I said I did a video on this one. You can hear all my thoughts on about this. I loved this book. It was very informative. It was, I mean, I just have all the tabs on this. And if you really want to know what it's like for women in combat zones, this is a good read, solid read. On the heels of that, I needed to read more about women in combat, but this time on a fiction level. And that was Kristen Hanna's Homefront. In this Iraq War, National Guardsman Jolene Zarkades gets called up to go to Iraq. In Iraq, and her husband, I won't tell you what happens in Iraq, I'll let you read that. Her husband, who's a real jackass, has been left behind to take care of the kids, and it is so inconvenient for him. And he doesn't understand why she has to go off to war because she's a mother. And that kind of extends a theme from Send Me, which really infuriates me. But I enjoyed both books. Love Send Me. Really liked Homefront. There's kind of a pat, nicely wrapped up ending, which you see sometimes in Kristen Hanna's books, but that's fine. That's fine. Everything can't have a horrible ending. Next up, I did some middle grade fiction. I have been following Ali Malinenko on Twitter for quite some time now, and I'd been meaning to read one of her books, and then I read Ghost Girl. Fun middle grade read about a demon that comes to town and how 3 friends who started out as enemies, at least one of them was an enemy, have to fight the evil. Anyway, do recommend for a middle grade read. Next up, I read The Return of Ellie Black by Emiko Jean. This one, solid 3 stars, I believe. I don't remember all my ratings on these. I do remember there might have been a place where it dragged in the middle somewhere for me, but there was a twist at the end that I did not see coming, and I love that. I hate it when I can predict things, but a good twist, yeah. So, decent book, give it a shot. Not one of my absolute favorites for the month, but still really good. Next up, I went to horror, and I stayed there for a book or two. I've also had episode 13 by Craig DeLuey in my TBR for quite some time. I only gave this 1 tab, but I really enjoyed this. This is kind of a found footage book. I really enjoyed this. I have questions about the end, and I love that. I love when a book ending leaves me uncertain as to what happened in a good way. In a good way, because you can do it in a good way or you can do it in a bad way. This was done in a good way. So, if you like found footage books, check this one out. I finally read a book that I did not know was a book, but that was Robert Bloch's Psycho. And I loved this book. Loved it. The movie Psycho largely pulls from this book. The book reads like Norman Bates. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I highly recommend it. None of these, just a caveat, if you get scared easily, that might scare you. I don't get scared anymore by horror, thanks Stephen King. Now, next up is not a book I started and finished in May. It is a book I started. It's a collection of essays on queer reflections on horror. I started it last Pride Month, and I'm terrible with short stories or collections, but I was determined to finish it before this coming Pride Month. And that was It Came from the Closet. Some of these are really great, really relatable from the human standpoint. I started trying to watch the movies after I read the essays, but I could not sustain that. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Some were more impactful than others, but I do think that this is recommended. If you like horror, it's great to read these essays and look at the movie from a different perspective. Sleepaway Camp, Halloween, gosh, so many horror movies that I have watched. The Exorcist, Pet Sematary, Jennifer's Body, recommend. All right, we're coming to the last part of the month. I'm easily influenced by books that people recommend online, and that is why I buy so many books, even though I have thousands. Next up, I read Severance by Ling Ma. This is a apocalyptic fiction, and I love that, but this was definitely different. It was part apocalyptic fiction, part love story to cities, I think. Anyway, very, very good. I found it was written prior to 2020, and there were some things that was like, whoa, like, is she, can she see in the future? But Severance by Ling Ma, if you like apocalyptic fiction, give it a shout. Try. Don't shout at it. Next up, I needed something completely different, so I went with Jennifer Saint's Atalanta, and I love this cover. I liked the book a lot. I'm not sure this whole trend of mythology fiction is going to be the thing that keeps me riveted. I liked it. It was refreshing. I loved the story. I loved Atalanta's story. The Greek gods were assholes and abusers. I mean, that doesn't bother me, but, you know. I don't know if I'll continue on, because I know that's really trendy right now. Next up is a book I have mixed feelings about. I think it was a solid debut. There was a bit at the very beginning where she's a little too flowery and a little too metaphor-y in her writing, but she made a character I completely despised, and yet there were points I was rooting for him, and so that to me is a sign of good writing. That is The Peacock and the Sparrow by I.S. Berry. This is about a CIA spy in Bahrain, and there's some twists that I did see coming, but it was okay because of the main character's repulsiveness and watching him and his arrogance. That's all I'll say. I won't say what his arrogance leads him to. Next up, two books that I did a video on, my thoughts on, in one video, because it's about two of my favorite authors. Stephen King, I reread Cujo. It broke my heart. You can read about it in the link in the description box. And Nora Roberts had a new release, and that was Mind Games, and I completely loved this book. Again, you can read my thoughts in the description box below on the video. You can click the link. But I thoroughly love this. It's one I wish I could reread again, not knowing anything that happened in it. Next up, a friend of mine posted on Goodreads or somewhere that they had read this book, so naturally I picked it up. And that was The Taken Ones. I did not do a video on this. It took me probably several chapters to get into this, but I persisted. It's got flawed main characters, which I love. I may or may not read the second one. Originally I said I was, but now because of the last line, but we'll see. If I stumble across it when it comes out sometime, I'll get it. If not, I won't. Finally, I was gonna read one more book starting Thursday the 30th, and I sat down to read it to finish May off. I sat down to read it, and then shit happened in the news and I got distracted, so that book will end up being in June. And I ended up finishing the month with Ruth Ware's One Perfect Couple. Loved it. Unreliable narrator in parts, or at least it seemed that way. At the end, I figured out why it was that way, and I loved it. I love Ruth Ware. I think the previous book that she published, I did not read because the subject line, or the subject matter seemed like not relatable to me, but I might go back and check it out one day when I don't have 8,000 books, I'm exaggerating, but only by a little, that I have yet to read. So, that is all for me. That was my monthly recap of what I read in May. I'd love to hear what you read. If you've read any of these and have thoughts, please let me know down in the comments. And I will be back probably tomorrow with a different kind of my weekend books, because the last 2 weeks in a row there have been things that have distracted me from doing what I normally do. Anywho, again, that's all for me. Happy reading!